A Maritime-Ship-Sea Museum Guide. Chapter 1. Maritime Museum Websites. Maritime Museum/Sea Travel Museum/Ship Museums. Council of American Maritime Museums. Council of American Maritime Museums.org. MaritimeMuseums.net, Smith's Master Index of Maritime Museum Websites, locate maritime museums worldwide. anmm.gov.au/site/page.cfm, Australian National Maritime Museum. Bathmain.com, Main Maritime Museum. bcferries.bc.ca/corporate/history, ferry history BC Ferries. bluff.co.nz/museum.html, Bluff Maritime Museum, NZ. bondstour.co.nz/maritime.htm, Wellington Maritime Museum, NZ. Canals.org, National Canal Museum. cbmm.org, Chesapeake Bay Museum. Chicago Maritime Society.org, Chicago Maritime Society. crmm.org, Columbia River Maritime Museum, Astoria, or ctrivermuseum.org, CT River Museum. e-owensound.com/marinera Marine Rail Museum, on, Canada. flagship.org.uk/welcome.html, Portsmouth Historic Ships. fma.fi/simocanal/English, Canal Museum, Finland. gopby.com/community/groups/pbmm, Palm Beach Maritime Museum. gov.pe.ca/infopay/transportation/se/ferries/the_pay_ferry_ferry_services, ferry history, pay, Canada. Intrepid Sea Airspace Museum. kwm.org/home.htm, Kendall Whaling Museum, Sharon, Mass. Mariner.org, The Mariners Museum. Mariner.org, The Mariners Museum, Newport, Virginia. Marinersmuseum.org, Mariners Museum, Newport News, VA. Maritime.org/index.html, National Maritime Museum Association. maritime-museum.allen.fi/index_eng.html, and Airing, Lands Maritime Museum, Finland. mcny.org, Museum of the City of New York. mm.wa.gov.au, Western Australian Maritime Museum. museum.gov.ns.ca/mma, Maritime Museums of the Atlantic, Canada. mysticseaport.org, Mystic Seaport, Mystic, Con. nantucket.net/museum/lifesaving, the Nantucket Life Saving Museum. navalmuseum.ab.ca, the Naval Museum of Alberta, Canada. nba.fi/museum/maritime/marymeng.htm, Finland's Maritime Museum. nmm.ac.uk, the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, UK. nps.gov/safar, Maritime National Park. nps.gov/safar, San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. nps.gov/usar/index.htm, the Arizona Memorial. nzmaritime.org, New Zealand National Maritime Museum. queenmary.org, the Queen Mary Foundation. riverboat.co.nz, Whanganui Riverboat Centre, NZ. rmg.co.uk/national-maritime-museum, National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, England. savonlinna.fi/sivistes/museos/museumships.htm, Savonlinna Ship Museum, Finland. sdmaritime.com, San Diego Maritime Museum. shipwreckmuseum.com, Shipwreck Museum. si.edu, the Smithsonian Institution. southstseaport.org, South Street Seaport Museum. talent.ee/mirmuseum/English, the Estonian State Maritime Museum. tbc.gov.bc.ca, BC Cultural Maritime Museum, Canada. USS Constitution Museum.org, USS Constitution Museum, Charlestown, Mass. USS Nautilus.org, Historic Ship Nautilus homepage. Vancouver Maritime Museum.com, Vancouver Maritime Museum, Vancouver, BC, Canada. vasamuzet.se/indexing.html, The Vasa Museum, Sweden. vmm.bc.ca/index.htm, BC Museum Association. And Vancouver Maritime Museum. Whalingmuseum.org, New Bedford Whaling Museum, New Bedford, Mass. WIMaritimemuseum.org, the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. YavaRI.org, Yavari Project, Peru. Maritime Museum websites at dmoz-odp.org/reference/museum/transportation/maritime. Subcategories: boats, ships, Africa, Asia, Caribbean, Europe, North America, Oceania, South America. rmg.co.uk/Cuddy-Sark, the Cuddy Sark, famous tea clipper now moored at Greenwich, England. Features information on opening times, restoration, and history. Dunbrody.com, Dunbrody, famine ship, the reconstruction of a three-masted bark Dunbrody, originally built Quebec 1845 for the Graves family in New Ross. hcscc.online.org/current-exhibits/hgemkomst-viking-ship, Hgemkomst Viking ship, Viking ship replica. Museum is located at Moorhead, MN. Ernestina.org, the schooner Ernestina, Grand Banks fishing schooner recognized as a National Historic Landmark by the Department of the Interior. Information on its history, events calendar, programs, and membership. greatscience.com/exhibits/steamship-william-g-mather.aspx, the Steamship William G. Mather Museum, retired Great Lakes bulk freighter. Provides photo gallery, schedule of events, and hours of operation. historicalseaport.org, Lady Love, the Lady Washington, replica of an 18th century 90-ton brig. Provides volunteerism, the current and past cruise, the ship's schedule, vessel specifications, a weblog, an image gallery, and FAQs. Located in Aberdeen, Washington. Kalmarnyckel.org, Kalmarnyckel, the tall ship of Delaware, includes pictures of the ship and the role it played in settling the Wilmington, Delaware area. nps.gov/safar/historyculture/c-a-thayer.htm, schooner ca. Thayer, features history of the 1895 schooner and its restoration. Located in San Francisco, ca. nps.gov/safar/historyculture/balclutha.htm, square rigger Balclutha, 1886 vessel featuring history and facility information. Overfalls.org, Overfalls Maritime Museum Foundation, OMMF, one of only 17 remaining U.S. lightships, restored and placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Includes a visitor's guide, membership details, and direction to Lewis, Delaware, United States. ss-shieldhall.co.uk, SS Shield Hall, cargo steamship built on River Clyde, 1955. Includes information on sailing programs and technical details. Stephen Battery Oceanliner.weebly.com, TSS Stephen Battery, the last regularly scheduled transatlantic liner which sailed until 1988. Provides her history, photos, and sister ships. TheTallShip.com, the Tall Ship at Riverside, main exhibit is the restored Clyde-built bark Glenlee, 1896. VirginiaV.org, the steamship Virginia V, 1921 steam-powered passenger vessel and one of only two operating steam-powered, wooden-hull passenger ships surviving in the United States today. Located in Seattle, WA. Chapter 2. A list of maritime museums by U.S. State at Council of American Maritime Museums.org/member-directory/state-listing. Alaska. KodiakMaritimeMuseum.org, Kodiak Maritime Museum. California. nps.gov/SAFAR, San Francisco Maritime National Historic Park. Channel Islands Maritime-Museum.org, Channel Islands Maritime Museum. LawMaritimeMuseum.org, Los Angeles Maritime Museum. SDMaritime.org, Maritime Museum Association of San Diego. OCEAN-INSTITUTE.org, Ocean Institute. nps.gov/SAFAR, San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. Maritime.org, San Francisco Maritime National Park Association. SBMM.org, Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. LanaVictory.org, U.S. Merchant Marine Veterans of World War II, SS. Lane Victory. Connecticut. CTRiverMuseum.org, Connecticut River Museum. MysticSeaport.org, Mystic Seaport. CoastGuardMuseum.org, National Coast Guard Museum Association. uscg.mil/hq/cg092/museum, U.S. Coast Guard Academy Museum. Delaware. Kalmarnyckel.org, Kalmarnyckel. Overfalls.org, Lightship Overfalls, LV-118. District of Columbia. history.navy.mil/museum/org8-1.htm, National Museum of the U.S. Navy. NavyHistory.org, Naval Historical Foundation. AmericanHistory.si.edu, Smithsonian Institution, National Museum of American History. Florida. FloridaMaritimeMuseum.org, Florida Maritime Museum. StAugustineLighthouse.com, St. Augustine Lighthouse and Maritime Museum. Georgia. ShipsOfTheSea.org, Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum. Illinois. ThenRG.org, Nautical Research Guild, Inc. Louisiana. Nichols.edu/boat, Center for Traditional Louisiana Boat Building. Maritime Museum Louisiana.org, Maritime Museum Louisiana. Maine. MaineMaritimeMuseum.org, Maine Maritime Museum. PenobscotMarineMuseum.org, Penobscot Marine Museum. Maryland. Amaritime.org, Annapolis Maritime Museum. CalvertMarineMuseum.com, Calvert Marine Museum. CBMM.org, Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. navc.navy.mil/home/warfari-centers/nswc Carderock/resources/curator of Navy Ship Models.aspx, Curator of Ship Models, U.S. Navy. HNSA.org, Historic Naval Ships Association. HistoricShips.org, Historic Ships in Baltimore. MDHS.org, Maryland Center for History and Culture. MuseumSmallCraft.org, Museum Small Craft Association. usna.edu/museum, U.S. Naval Academy Museum. Massachusetts. CapeCodMaritimeMuseum.org, Cape Cod Maritime Museum. ChathamMarconi.org, Chatham Marconi Maritime Center/Marconi RCA Wireless Museum. Whole Life Saving Museum.org, Whole Life Saving Museum. Lowell'sBoatShop.com, Lowell's Boat Shop. MaritimeGloucester.org, Maritime Gloucester. web.mit.edu/museum/collections/nautical.html, MIT Museum, Hart Nautical Collection. nha.org, Nantucket Historical Association/Nantucket Whaling Museum. NantucketShipwreck.org, Nantucket Shipwreck and Life Saving Museum. FishingHeritageCenter.org, New Bedford Fishing Heritage Center. WhalingMuseum.org, New Bedford Whaling Museum. PEM.org, Peabody Essex Museum. nps.gov/sama/index.htm, Salem Maritime National Historic Site. SituateHistoricalSociety.org, Situate Historical Society. NANTUCKETLIGHTSHIPLV-112.org, U.S. Lightship Museum. USLIFE-SAVINGSERVICE.org, U.S. Life-Saving Service Heritage Association. USS Constitution Museum.org, USS Constitution Museum. Michigan. Michigan Maritime Museum.org, Michigan Maritime Museum. Minnesota. Legacy of the Lakes.org, Legacy of the Lakes Museum. New Hampshire. NHBM.org, New Hampshire Boat Museum. New Jersey. BayshoreCenter.org, Bayshore Center at Bivaffle. TuckertonSeaport.org, Tuckerton Seaport. New York. ADKMuseum.org, Adirondack Experience. usmma.edu/museum, American Merchant Marine Museum. abm.org, Antique Boat Museum. eastonseaport.org, East End Seaport Museum. eriecanalmuseum.org, Erie Canal Museum. hrmm.org, Hudson River Maritime Museum. cshwhalingmuseum.org, the Whaling Museum at Cold Spring Harbor. leemaritime.org, Long Island Maritime Museum. sunymaritime.edu/maritime%20 museum/index, Maritime Industry Museum at Fort Schuyler. lighthousemuseum.org, National Lighthouse Museum. seahistory.org, National Maritime Historical Society. shawnee.org, South Street Seaport Museum. cshwhalingmuseum.org, the Whaling Museum at Cold Spring Harbor. North Carolina. ncmaritime.org, North Carolina Maritime Museum. graveyardoftheatlantic.com, Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. Ohio. inlandzas.org, National Museum of the Great Lakes. Oregon. crmm.org, Columbia River Maritime Museum. Pennsylvania. bayfrontcenter.org, Bayfront Maritime Center. eriemaritime-museum.org, Erie Maritime Museum/US Brig Niagara. philaseaport.org, Independence Seaport Museum. Rhode Island. Harrishoff.org, Harrishoff Marine Museum. South Carolina. scmaritimemuseum.org, South Carolina Maritime Museum. sshsa.org, Steamship Historical Society of America. Texas. HoustonMaritimeMuseum.org, Houston Maritime Museum. nauticalarch.org, Institute of Nautical Archaeology. galvestonhistory.org, Texas Seaport Museum/1877 Barkalissa. Vermont. lcmm.org, Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. Virginia. deltavillemuseum.com, Deltaville Maritime Museum and Holly Point Nature Park. history.navy.mil/museum/hrnm. hrnm.navy.mil, Hampton Roads Naval Museum. marinersmuseum.org, the Mariners Museum. portsnavalmuseums.com, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum and the Lightship Museum. steamboateramuseum.org, Steamboat Era Museum. rfmuseum.org, Reedville Fishermen's Museum. Washington. cwb.org, Center for Wooden Boats. nwseaport.org, Northwest Seaport. pugetmaritime.org, Puget Sound Maritime Historical Society. uslhs.org, U.S. Lighthouse Society. Point No Point Lighthouse, which is open to the public. Wisconsin. dcmm.org, Door County Maritime Museum. wisconsinmaritime.org, Wisconsin Maritime Museum. Chapter 3. Maritime Museums Around the World. Australia Maritime Museums. anmm.gov.au, Australian National Maritime Museum, Sydney, Australia. Canada Maritime Museums. marmuseum.ca, Marine Museum of the Great Lakes, Kingston, Ontario, Canada. maritimemuseum.novascotia.ca, Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. VancouverMaritimeMuseum.com, Vancouver Maritime Museum, Vancouver, Canada. Bermuda. NMB.BM, National Museum of Bermuda, Bermuda. Chapter 4. Lists of maritime museums from the DEAD website maritimemuseums.net. Find U.S. Maritime Museum websites by state. Go to archive.org then maritimemuseums.net. Click on a copy of this DEAD website. Click a state. Virtual Maritime Museums websites. Carriersg.org, Aircraft Carrier Study Group. AANDC.org, Archives and Collections Society. Battleship.org, the Battleship page. bluejacket.com/links.html, Blue Jacket links to naval history and sea service graphics. aug.edu/libwrw, Coast Guard Warriors. cindyvalar.com/pirates.html, Pirates and Privateers, the history of maritime piracy. cr.nps.gov/maritime/lt_index.htm, Lighthouse Heritage. dt.navy.mil/cnsm/index.html, Curator of Navy Ship Models. fleetairarmarchive.net, Fleet Air Arm Archive 1939–1945, England. greatoceanliners.net/gripshome2.html, The Great Ocean Liners, Sweden. hem.passagen.se/progenitor, Julian Dixon's Polylingual Translating Dictionary and Glossary. hnsa.org, Historic Naval Ships Visitor Guide. ijnhonline.org, International Journal of Naval History, USA. ipl.org/exhibit/light, Lighthouses. kidsisland.com, Kid was a pirate. library.puc.edu/Pitcairn, Pitcairn Islands Study Center. Lighthouse.cc, New England Lighthouses. lostliners.org, Lost Liners. nsnet.com/shipicsb/index.html, Shipbuilding Pictures Database. oakland.edu/boatnerd/ring, Great Lakes Web Ring, the best of the Great Lakes online. shipscompany.org, Ships Company. shipscompany.org. sshsa.net, Steamship Historical Society. titanic-nautical.com/titanic-resources.html, Titanic Nautical Resource Center, DE. uri.edu/mua, Museum of Underwater Archaeology. World Ship Society Tyvan.ca, World Ship Society Vancouver, British Columbia. Wright.edu/William.Lafferty, Lake Michigan Maritime Marginalia. Canada Maritime Museums. aandc.org, Archives and Collections Society, ONT. agaofsailmuseum.ca, Age of Sail Museum NS, the Age of Sail Museum, in Port Grieville, Nova Scotia. albertcountymuseum.ca, Albert County Museum, NB. atlanticchallenge.org, Atlantic Challenge, ONT. bytownmuseum.com, Bytown Museum, ONT. canoemuseum.net, Canoe Museum, ONT. cbmuseums.tripod.com/lmm.html, Louisbourg Marine Museum, NS. classicboats.org, Cowichan Bay Maritime Center, BC. discoveryharbor.on.ca/English, Discovery Harbor, ONT. doorsopenniagara.com/welland_Carnegie_WM.htm, Welland Historical Museum and NBSP, ONT. dorishop.com, Dory Shop, the, NS. en.wikipedia.org/wiki/HMCS_Fraser_left_DDH_233 right_HMCS Fraser, DDE233, later DDH233, NS. fishermanslife.museum.gov.ns.ca, Fisherman's Life. South Africa Maritime Museums. rapidttp.com/museum, South African Maritime Museum, Cape Town. Europe Maritime Museums. hem.firestore.com/sj Oman Shoes Museet, Sweden Siemens Shipping Office Museum, Sweden Siemens Shipping Office Museum. Americana irlines.wcities.com/en/record/285,2856334/549/record.html, Göteborgs Maritime Centrum, home.c2i.net/atlscars/compasser.htm, compasses carved in stone, Norway. museum.antwerpen.be/shipva art museum/index_eng.html, National Maritime Museum, Antwerp. ships.green.pl/shiplovers/eng.html, Polish Shiplovers Club, Poland. Asian Maritime Museums. Maritime Museum, Macau. Maritime Museum, Yokohama. Museum, Nippon Yusen Rikishi Shiryo-kan, Japan. The Nippon Maru, a handsome ship that sailed 1,830,000 kilometers. The NYK Maritime Museum. UK Maritime Museums. people.pwf.ca.mhe1000/marmis.htm, Maritime and Naval Museums in Britain and Ireland, UK. admiralnelson.org, Vice Admiral Horatio Lord Nelson, UK. Australia Maritime Museums. anmm.gov.au, Australian National Maritime Museum. anmm.gov.au, Endeavour, Cook's Bark. UK Now AUS. australia-downender-producer.com/ae2.php, discovery of the AE2, Aussie sub from WWI, Australia. australianheritage.fleet.com.au/index/index.html, Sydney Heritage Fleet. Some maritime museums worldwide. abc.se/m10354/publ/vasa.htm, National Maritime Museum and the Vasa Museum, Sweden. admiralnelson.org, Vice Admiral Horatio Lord Nelson, UK. anmm.gov.au, Australian National Maritime Museum. anmm.gov.au, Endeavour, Cook's Bark. antiguamuseums.org/nelsonsdockyard.htm, Nelson's Dockyard National Park, St. John's, Antigua. antiguamuseums.org/nelsonsdockyard.htm, Nelson's Dockyard National Park, St. John's, Antigua. armada.cl/site/tradicion_historia/tradicion/museonaval/intro2.html, Naval and Maritime Museum, Valparaiso. australia-downender-producer.com/ae2.php, discovery of the AE2, Aussie sub from WWI, Australia. australianheritage.fleet.com.au/index/index.html, Sydney Heritage Fleet, Australia. barnetresearch.freeserve.co.uk, Barnet Maritime History Research Online and NBSP, UK. bataviawharf.nl/en/wharf.html, Batavia Yard in Lelystad, Netherlands. bb62museum.org/worldnews.html, number sign p, Pakistan Maritime Museum, Pakistan. blueribbon.com, Masters of the Blue Riband, UK. bmm.bm, Bermuda Maritime Museum, Bermuda. Brantiviksmuseum.com, the Maritime Museum at Brantivik, Sweden. Brazilmar.com, Maritime Brazil, Brazil. Maritime Brazil, Brazil Maritimo. BrittanyTourism.com/eng/prepares/detail.cfm?ID=GDL187, the Navy Museum of Brest. canaljunction.com/musewfcc.htm, Waterfolk Canal Centre, Wales. canaljunction.com/museum/stoke_brewer.ne.htm, Stoke Brewer and Canal Museum, UK. canaljunction.com/museum/boat.htm, the Ellesmere Port Boat Museum, UK. canalmuseum.org.uk, London Canal Museum, UK. caphorniers.cl/stad-amsterdam/stad amsterdam-eng.htm, Stad Amsterdam, Netherlands. CaptainCookSociety.com, Captain Cook Study Unit, UK. channels.nl/amsterdam/shepv.html, Maritime Museum, Scheepvaart Museum, Amsterdam. city.yokohama.jp/yaspot/usen-e.html, NYK Maritime. city.yokohama.jp/yaspot/neon-e.html, Yokohama. combinedfleet.com/kaigun.htm, Imperial Japanese Navy page, website originates in Minneapolis, MN. cutysark.org.uk, Cutty Sark, Greenwich, UK. davyjoneslocker.co.uk, Who's Who in Davy Jones Locker, UK. deutschmuseum.de/museum.stel/dower/shift/e_shift.htm, National Museum, Germany, Munich. dmcsoft.com/tamh, Tayside, a Maritime History, Scotland. docmuseum.org.uk, Dockside Museum, UK. dsm.de/edsm.htm, German Maritime Museum, Bremerhaven. dutchsubmarines.com, Dutch Submarines, Netherlands. doefken.com, Doefken 1606 Replica Foundation, Australia. dzkk.tsk.mil.tr/musee/english/anna_safa.htm, Turkish Naval Museum, Turkey. edwebproject.org/Scandinavia/vasa.html, Vasa Museum, Stockholm. egreece.gr/cyclades/myk/aegean/museum1.shtml, Aegean Maritime Museum, Greece. ephimus.dk/foseng.htm, Fisheries and Seafaring Museum, Esbjerg. ephimus.dk/cmrhung.html, Center for Maritime and Regional History, Denmark. flagship.org.uk, Flagship. Portsmouth, UK. hmsbelfast.iwm.org.uk, HMS Belfast, UK. fwhp.ca/homepage.html, Old Fort William, ONT. galatamuseo-del-mare.it, Galata Museum of the Sea, Genoa. galenfrissenger.com/peterborough_liftlock_ontario.htm, Peterborough. gnb.ca/0130, New Brunswick Museum, NB. gothborg.com/project/keymoments.shtml, Swedish shipyard Terra Nova, Sweden. gov.pe.ca/pamhf/index.php3?1015692, Asenhead Fisheries Museum, Pay. gov.pe.ca/pamhf/index.php3?1015695, Green Park Shipbuilding Museum and NBSP, Pay. greece.org/poseidon/work/museum/him, Hellenic Maritime Museum, Greece. hamburgmuseum.de, Hamburg Museum, Hamburg. hamilton-scourge.hamilton.ca, Hamilton Scourge Project, ONT. heritagemalta.org/maritimemuseum.html, Malta Maritime Museum. archive.museophile.org/rowing, river. and Rowing Museum. hhpl.on.ca/Great Lakes, Maritime History of the Great Lakes. ONT. hickerphoto.com/steamship-seguin-9468-pictures.htm, RMS Seguin. ONT. history.sa.gov.au/maritime/maritime.htm, South Australian Maritime Museum, Australia. hmcshaida.ca, HMCS Haida. hmswarrior.org, HMS Warrior. hnsa.org/ships/benfranklin.htm, RV Ben Franklin. HuroniaMuseum.com, Huronia Museum and Huron Indian Village. IHES.com/BCN/Spanish/Barcelona/maritime_museum.html, Maritime Museum. ItalianTourism.com/museotecnica.html, Air and Sea Transport Building at the Museum of Science and Technology, Milan. JerseyHeritageTrust.org/sites/maritime/maritime.html, British Channel Islands Maritime Museum. joant.com/dir/info/get/11175/19327, Maritime History and Naval Heritage. Kalmar.se/t/page.aspx?ID=305112, Kalmar Maritime Museum. La Have Islands Marine Museum.ca, La Have Island Marine Museum, NS. lakelandartstrust.org.uk/steamboat, Windermere Steamboat Museum. lighthouse.boatner.com/gallery/Huron/Mississaugas/trite.htm, Mississauga Strait Lighthouse Museum. lsgb.co.uk, the Lighthouse Society of Great Britain. manitoulin-island-museum/Asigenack_complex.htm, Asigenack Historical Museum and SS Norris Heritage Park. mar.mil.br/sdm/e_pita.htm, Navy Cultural Center. mar.mil.br/sdm/e_hister.htm, Rio de Janeiro Naval and Oceanographic Museum. marine.nl/history/marine museum/English, Dutch Naval Museum Den Helder. marinemuseum.ca, Marine Museum of Manitoba, MTB. marinerail.com, Owen Sound Marine and Rail Museum. marinmuseum.se, Maritime Museum in Sweden. Maritime-Museum.nl, Maritime Museum Prince Hendrik Rotterdam. maritime-information.net/pages/home.htm, Maritime Information, UK. maritime.museum.gov.ns.ca, Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. maritimetas.org, Maritime Museum of Tasmania, Australia. marmuseum.ca, Marine Museum of the Great Lakes, ONT. Marrickvillehistory.ca, Marrickville Blockhouse Museum. Merseyside Maritime-Museum.org.uk, Merseyside Maritime Museum. Mindgrind.com. mmbc.bc.ca, Maritime Museum of British Columbia. mmq.qc.ca/a_propo_n.html, Bernie Maritime Museum. modelships.museum.ca/ships/about/info.cfm, Granville Island Model Ships Museum. mun.ca/mh, Maritime History Archive. musedelamer.qc.ca, Muse and Equit, E. de la Mer, QBC. museomaritimo.com, Museo Maritimo de Ushuaia. museum.gov.ns.ca/Dory, Dory Shop, Shelburne. museum.gov.ns.ca/FEMA, Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic, NS. museum.gov.ns.ca/LH, Lawrence House, NS. museum.wa.gov.au/maritime, Western Australia Maritime Museum, Australia. museum.wa.gov.au/maritime, Dargaville Maritime Museum. museummaritimo.gov.mo/index_e.html, Macau. museumofwellington.co.nz, Museum of Wellington City and Sea. museums.caribseek.com/Curacao/maritime_museum_Curacao, Maritime Museum of Curacao. museumsontario.com/museum/online-guide/details.aspx contact ID =2104, The Pier Museum. museumwales.ac.uk/en/Swansea, National Waterfront Museum, Swansea. muskoka.com/tourism/mlm, Muskoka Lakes Museum. naval-museum.mb.ca, Naval Museum of Manitoba. navalhistory.dk/indexus.htm, Danish Naval History. navalmuseum.ab.ca, the Naval Museum of Alberta. nba.fi/museum/maritime/marymeng.htm, the Maritime Museum of Finland. nelson-museum.co.uk, Norfolk Nelson Museum. neva.ru/expo96/book/book-cont.html, Russian Naval History, the history of Russian Navy. new2margate.com/blog06.html, the Margate Memorial, surfboat. nfmuseum.com/museum.htm, the Newfoundland Museum. nmm.ac.uk, National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, London. nmmc.co.uk, National Maritime Museum, Cornwall. Nova Scotia Heritage.ca/en/home/search details.aspx ?NSEM =BGQ9JM1VZGU9MJCMBGLZ Dealey PTE5, Archelaus Smith Museum. nzmaritime.org/home.html, New Zealand National Maritime Museum. nzmuseums.co.nz, New Zealand Museums Online. osc.on.ca, Ontario Science Centre, ONT. ottawahouse.org, Ottawa House by the Sea, NS. parkscanada.gc.ca/lhn-nhs/qc/Grosse Isle and the Irish Memorial National Historic Site. parkscanada.gc.ca/SLE, St. Lawrence Islands National Park/Browns Bay Rec. pc.gc.ca/lhn-his/ns/halifax/index_e.asp, Halifax Citadel National Historic Site. pc.gc.ca/lhn-nhs/ns/St. Peters/index_e.asp, St. Peters Canal. pc.gc.ca/lhn-nhs/on/Trent Severn/index_e.asp, Trent Severn Waterway. pc.gc.ca/lhn-his/qc/Coteau-du-Lac/index_e.asp, Coteau-du-Lac National Historic Site. pc.gc.ca/lhn-his/qc/Cartier-Brébeuf/index_e.asp, Cartier-Brébeuf National Historical Park. pc.gc.ca/amnc-on/fathom5/default.asp, Fathom 5 National Marine Park. pc.gc.ca/lhn-nhs/mb/Fort Garry/index_e.asp, Lower Fort Garry. pc.gc.ca/voyage-travel/pv-vp/id m6-page22_e.asp, Marie Canal Visitor Center. pcema.ca, Peterborough Centennial Museum and Archives. pec.on.ca/mariners-museum/index.html, Mariners Park Museum. petersburg-hotels.com/eng/guide/museum/naval.html, Central Naval Museum, Submarine. Port %20 Colborne %20 Historical %20 and %20 Marine %20 Museum, Port Colborne Historical and Marine Museum. qmma.ecn.net.au, Queensland Maritime Museum Australia. qsl.net/ounce1rdn, Pederskram Danish frigate. queenscountymuseum.com, Queens County Museum. rbcm1.rbcm.gov.bc.ca, Royal British Columbia Provincial Museum. redicivica.triest.it/triest cultura/musei/scientifici/museomare/mariframe.htm, Museo del Mare, Trieste. The Museo del Mare, Trieste exhibition was first set up in 1904, when the Fishing Society, founded in 1888, opened a museum of fishing. rideau-info.com/lockhouse, Lockmaster's House. Museum. rideau-info.com/museum/index.html, Rideau Canal Museum. rmk-museum.org.tr, Rami-Mko and Xadil, Museum of Istanbul. rnsubmuse.co.uk, Royal Navy Submarine. russia.com/museum/aurora-cruiser, Central Naval Museum. samsonmuseum.org/samson%20 about.htm, Samson v. Steamer. settlersmuseum.ns.ca, Settlers Museum. shipscompany.org/links.htm, Hamilton Ships Company of simonstown.com/museum/stm_main.htm, the Simon's Town Museum, so. Africa. snr.org.uk, the Society for Nautical Research. southaustralia.com/90025009.aspx, Port MacDonnell and District Maritime Museum, Australia. stcatharneslock3museum.ca, St. Catherine's Museum. steelnavy.com/sackville.htm, HMCS Sackville and the Sunshine Coast Museum.ca/about, Sunshine Coast Maritime. tallshipbounty.org, the Bounty. torontoport.com/corporate_archives.asp?id=37, Toronto Port Authority Archives. traveldownunder/south_wales/Eden_killer_whale_museum.asp, Killer Whale Museum. tuc.gr/marmuseum/eng/eng-index.htm, Maritime Museum of Crete. ukmcs.org.uk/members/member_Plymouth_Naval_Base_Museum.htm, Plymouth Naval Base. ukmcs.org.uk/members/member_international_sailing_craft_association.htm, International Sailing Craft Association. users.psbmembers.com/Markham Museum, Maritime Command Museum. vancouvermaritimemuseum.com, Vancouver Maritime Museum. venice-sightgs.uk/museo-storico-navali.htm, Naval History Museum, Museo Storico Naval. warrnambool.com/attractions/Flagstaff, Flagstaff Hill Maritime Museum, Australia. wasagabeachpark.com, Nancy Island Historic Site. woodenboatfestival.org, Mahone Bay Wooden Boat Festival. Yarmouth County Museum.ednet.ns.ca, Yarmouth County Museum in Yarmouth. yesnet.yk.ca/schools/carcross, Carcross Community School. zaids.com.au/geelong/maritime.html, Geelong Maritime Museum, Australia.